Hello, and welcome to our virtual chat. I'm Jackie Geiger. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Reltio. And in the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about a really exciting story. It's the story of Hyperion X and how they're accelerating their digital transformation with connected customer data. So we want to make sure that this is a really valuable session for you. Feel free to type your question into the chat at any time. We're going to save some time at the end to take your questions. And we're also going to have a couple of poll questions for you so we can better understand your current situation. So what I'd like to do first off is introduce you to our special guest speaker, David Crompton. He is the head of data governance at Hyperion X. And if you haven't heard of Hyperion X, this is the technology division of the Hyperion Insurance Group. And David is responsible for data governance, master data management, and data quality. And they're working really hard to accelerate the transformation of the company. So we figured we'd talk about 5 things today that might be of interest to you. We're going to give you a quick overview of the company and the key drivers of the transformation. We're going to talk about why connected customer data is so critical to the company. David will share his top requirements for a data management solution, and then he'll talk about the business impact that they are aiming for, as well as a peek into their roadmap, and he'll provide some advice and guidance to you as well. So I wanted to welcome you, David, and hope you can give us just a brief overview about you and one personal fun fact.
Hi, Jackie. An overview of me. So obviously I'm working at Hyperion X at the moment as head of data governance. I've spent most of my career working with data in various guises, mostly within financial services. But data governance is kind of what I've been doing for some time. An interesting fact. What can I say about that? I spend a lot of, not that interesting, but I spend a lot of my time on my bike cycling, and I used to do a lot of events, and that was kind of my thing until very recently. Obviously, can't go out anymore and do that as much as I'd like to, but that's kind of how it is.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a major unprecedented situation happening in the marketplace today. And when you and I spoke last, you mentioned about Lloyd's of London being closed. So can you talk a little bit about what that means for your industry in particular?
Well, I think the underwriting room is closed for the first time in ever, I believe. So it means that the process of moving to remote working, doing things away from face-to-face contact, is kind of, we've had to start to operate in a different way. So it's pushed, and it's kind of made people more aware of how can we possibly operate not being face-to-face. It's pushed the narrative in that sense. So in terms of how we're operating, it's just, as far as we're concerned, it's business as usual. We're just operating from our homes. But it is, as I say, completely unprecedented that this has happened.
Okay. And what about the manual and laborious processes that we've talked about with insurance, right? There's still a lot of binders filled with paper, and your goal is to really just get everything to be a more digital process. And can you talk a little bit about like the acceleration from how long to how long are you trying to change these processes?
So I think we're looking at a number of things in terms of how to become more agile and more digital in the way we operate. And as you know, the insurance sector is very much, a lot of it is based on relationships. Much of it is done in paper-based, lots of rekeying into systems. Processes are done in ways in which they work, but they're not particularly operationally efficient. And so we are looking at ways of standardizing the process, bringing in just even at the detailed level, on defining our data, defining our processes, defining what's critical, moving away as far away as possible from the concept of rekeying information from off system into system and into system, which is kind of proliferated throughout certainly where we're working remote and in other parts of the sector as well. It's an interesting environment. I mean, I'm new into insurance, and I've spent my time in working mostly in banking, and the insurance seems to be a little bit behind the curve compared to other areas of financial services. So I think it's kind of ripe for the transformation side, and in terms of technology that now exists, allows us to be able to do these sorts of things. It can help push that agenda a little bit quicker than before.
And I'm assuming that now the brokers must be even more excited to be able to get their hands on real-time customer data. They're working remotely. How do they still engage with their clients, right?
So everything is done remotely. So everything is done through, I said, video conferencing and telephones and through emails. It doesn't change the ability to be able to access data within our systems and environments. It's just a different way of doing it. So in that sense, there isn't that much difference, but it's just, as I said, it's the method it has changed, and the fact that we're all no longer face-to-face is what has changed.
Excellent. Thanks, David. And I think it'd be helpful for those who aren't familiar with Hyperion X. Can you talk a little bit about why the company was founded?
Yeah, so it was set up as a digital data analytics arm of Hyperion Insurance Group. It was set up with the ideas and aims to make and streamline processes, to drive better insight, to drive understanding of how we use our data, to ensure that the data that we have in the organization is used in a much more effective and kind of 21st century way of thinking. And we obviously have a number of products internally and externally that we provide to the market and to others. And so it was felt that there needed to be a separate division set up focused purely on doing the data side of the business. And as I said, my role in that is helping facilitate best practice, bringing in good standards, building out good quality tooling with people and processes wrapped around it, and ensuring that we are able to utilize and harmonize the vast quantities of data we have in the organization that hitherto is used, but it is often used in isolation in parts of the business for certain particular purposes, but not necessarily used in that holistic across the group sense, which is what we're trying to achieve.
Excellent. And so for those who aren't as familiar, can you talk a little bit about the global distribution of the company?
Mm-hmm. So as it says on the slide, 36 territories. So we have coverage across the globe. We were based in London. We have 5,000 odd employees within the group. We have data in many parts of the world, systems across the world, different types of processes, standards, people, tooling, quality levels are different. We deal with all of these different parts of data across the world. That means that when we're doing some of the activities around master data management, it means that we have to be quite clear about what is good, because different versions of good exist across the various offices that we have.
Yeah, so it's a complex challenge you have, and you're going through a transformation, and I think it'd be useful for everyone to understand, what is your definition of transformation?
Yeah, so I mean, it's different wherever you go, and it's a word that's used by many people for many purposes, but in terms of what we're trying to achieve, I mean, there's a number of bullets here, and this is streamlining existing manual processes is quite a big one, because this ultimately is about lowering the cost of doing business. So if we are able to free up people's time to do value generating activities rather than trying to just, for example, rekeying information, or it immediately means that we are streamlining, but we're putting people in the position where they're able to do things of more value to us, and utilizing the data that we have in the organization in a way in which we currently we are starting to be able to do this, because we have the holistic approach to looking at all of the various data domains that we have, the various silos of information, pull them into a central source, and then we're able to leverage that data in a number of ways, internally and externally. And some of the other bullets, I'm talking about hyper-personalizing products and services. So part of this is, again, driven through some of our tooling rollout, but it's ultimately about defining processes and people behind what is it that we do, and defining what it is that we do. And this is something that we're very much focused on at the moment, because as I think generally with insurance, there isn't this really grand taxonomy of how things are done. It differs depending on organisation to an extent. So we are focusing on trying to do that to enable us to be able to standardise and I said lower the cost of business and streamline processes. Of course, the compliance angle is very important for us. We service a number of we deal with countries across the world. We have to be mindful and adhere to a number of obligations, not just GDPR or the CCPA, but also we have regulatory concerns and that we have to address as being as working with regulated customers as well. So that is absolutely very, very much part of our remit to ensure that we are adhering to those.
All right, thank you for sharing that. So what I'm thinking is let's do a poll to find out about the transformation status of the people that are on the line today. So if we could launch that, if you could just take one quick minute to answer the poll question and let us know what the current status is of your transformation. As we talk to some companies, it's really accelerated because they need to shift everything to digital. And in other companies, they are, staying the course. They're in the same exact situation they were before the climate changed. And others are still figuring out what does transformation mean to our company and what are the different milestones that we want to achieve. So, wow, look at this, 66% David said that they're accelerating their transformation now. So thinking about your shift from being product-centric to being customer-centric, can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about your customer data differently?
Yeah, so I think we started by trying to understand what is a customer for us, and I mean if we step back and look at how it's been done historically, it's been done in isolation based upon the purpose of the particular part of the business. So again, talking about silos, looking at these kind of domains where a customer is seen as a particular thing for a particular purpose. So for one part of the organization, the customer is just someone they interact with for a particular product. Other parts of the organization, it may be someone we've had for example, there may be a prospect or a lead. All of these, pooling all of those various different types of what a customer could be, and understanding how that all fits together is kind of where we started. And again, if you look at some of the bullets on here, trying to understand what is that single customer view. So what are the various different types of attributes that need to be captured in order for that to be useful for anyone in the organization to better understand what a customer is, how can we can enrich that with more useful information that can be used to drive insight, to look at strategic pieces, to look at where we can go after new markets. And behind this, we're also capturing other information. So, for example, customer preferences. So we have information that is in the building around how we've contacted a particular customer and what they're and how we may have done marketing with them, or perhaps the types of communications we've had with them. So capturing that under the same record as our maybe transactional information that we have, or for our policy information, gives that full picture that allows insight in all of the nice things we want to be able to do. But the core thing is understanding what is that and what does that look like for an organization, and it can be different depending on obviously what the needs and wants of the organization are. And we have, on the right side, there's some examples of channels that we use, reference data, third-party data feeds, to be able to enrich the record even more so. Reference data is really very important and can be quite easily overlooked, but it is the challenge we've faced is, of course, that there are standards that exist, and this is challenges I've had in other places where there are standards that exist like SICs. There may be industry codes that exist. There may be we have Lloyd's risk codes, for example. There may be country codes, currency codes that exist, but those codes will almost certainly not marry up with what the lens that is required by various parts of the business. So there's a piece of defining what is good for the organization, and certainly we've had to do this in a lot of detail, and also where there are exceptions to the rules, document those, build out data standards, define what's right, capture that information, capture the audit history and why that's been done. And where there are slightly different hierarchies, for example, for reporting for various purposes, to document what those are, build the mappings, and ensure that there's been a process of going around to the various stakeholders to ensure that there is a conformity and agreement on what is right, what is wrong. And that takes a lot of time. And it's a piece of work that we spent an awful lot of time trying to build out. But it's something that could be quite easily overlooked. And third-party data, we have a plan which is around how we're going to incorporate Dun & Bradstreet data to enrich the party record. Locate we're using to do address cleansing, and also we have it for our US parties, we have that integrated with the product, so we can run straight. Data comes from our broking systems, often not the best quality because of issues we have with entry, which is being addressed through some of the work that's coming out of this work. But it goes into Reltio. Locate will then be able to do a cleanse on that, and it will cleanse it as it goes in, so that we end up with the cleansed data that arrives in Reltio that can then be provisioned to other parts of the organization. The plan is for us to loop back into source systems. That's phase 2. Where we can't do that because we're precluded because of some of our systems are very old, life expired, cannot be integrated very well. We will just be using the kind of holding the mirror up approach and through kind of quality reporting. And finally, kind of geocodes. We're interested in geocodes because geocodes can be used for a number of pieces, particularly around kind of modeling and where we want to be able to look at the risk side. So where we can, and of course, it provides us the ability to use mapping data nicely and be able to produce reports, accurate kinds of reports and dashboards and the like across the business. We're using Locate to enhance geocoding. We also have our own way of doing this that we're pushing into Reltio as well. So it's about getting the data that is most important, that is required to create that full focus, and then defining what's right, creating the rules, and then enriching that kind of through the customer 360 record that we all like to talk about.
So David, this is not your first MDM implementation, right? You've done this a few times in the past. And so if you could kind of compare and contrast what sort of a legacy MDM approach might be compared to what you're experiencing today, I think that would be valuable for people.
Sure. I think there's a number of differences. I mean, the thing that we can do quite well in Hyperion X is we're very quick and agile, and we're able to change and modify. And that kind of fits with Reltio as well, in the sense that the way in which it's obviously a graph database, so we're not precluded by using a standard kind of traditional kind of data model. We have changed our requirements a little bit as it moves through the project, and we've found new things we wanted to do. For example, being able to have our hierarchies mapped in a certain way, and I think the flexibility has enabled us to do that. I mean, I've worked on implementations before where there have been quite rigid requirements that have been put in up front, and we spent a lot of time figuring out what is it that we want. Only for us to get into the nuts and bolts of the project, to realise that actually some of the things we're trying to do were not that actually possible, because we're once into the weeds of the detail, realising actually, oh no, we can't modify this, we can't modify that, because we have an inflexible or reasonably inflexible data model that can't be changed in the way we want it to. And I think the other thing, the advantage we've had is that we are a new organisation, and we are working as I said, like a data division as a separate organisation. So we're able to get on with it without necessarily having to deal with legacy issues within an organisation. And that has made it a lot clearer and simpler in terms of doing what we want to do. And I would say in terms of actual implementation, I think our original estimate was an 18-week implementation. It's going to take, I think, slightly longer than that. But we have worked on, obviously, the agile approach of doing it as we go along and iterating. And that, again, is more flexible, and it allows us to be able to move in a way that fits us as an organisation quite well, I think.
Excellent. All right. So could you share what your top requirements were when you were looking for a different solution?
So I think there are a number on here. Cloud first being one of the requirements. We are, as an organisation, we wanted to be able to rely on a vendor to be able to effectively manage this part of the implementation for us. And strategically, that's kind of the plan of the group. To go down that approach, it makes sense because it means we don't have to have an army of people in our end managing this, but also in some respects it's easier to kind of outsource us to experts that's what they do, whereas we would be kind of having to run our own operations in this space. Quick implementation, absolutely important. We run very, very quick, tight timescales in how we operate, so we need to be able to turn things around quickly. I mean, I've worked on MDM programs that have taken years to deliver, and some that never do. And so we needed to be quite confident that what we could do would be done relatively quickly. I mean, other things, for example, flexible data models I've mentioned. The ability to add new data sources is absolutely critical, and that's now come to life where we have 2 new data sources that we're going to be adding that were not originally anywhere near the scope. But we can. We've modified the scope and we're able to ingest those. Scalability is a big one, obviously the usual kind of things around having 24/7 support, flexibility on terms of numbers of users, use of kind of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So this wasn't something that attracted us because we trying to streamline our operations, and currently we have quite a manual, relatively laborious process around kind of matching party records where we don't have an exact match, and we want to be able to use use of kind of algorithms and taking people out of the loop where we can, and that's something that Reltio does to an extent, specifically where when a good example is we're able to match. We think it's going to be around about 20% more of our party records compared to our existing solution, just because, one, we're going to have claims data as it goes in, and two, Reltio is able to do it much better than how we're currently doing it and kind of hand cranking it manually. So that means that actually our unique number of records will drop, but the quality will increase. And kind of in terms of business value, probably the biggest selling point in terms of how we were looking for, when we were looking for tools, is around how can we bring stewardship to the business. We're quite a fragmented organization, I would say, I think, like many insurers, and we're trying to build the concept of data ownership, data stewardship, and that requires lots of people and process, but also if there's a really, really nice tool available that is easy to use, that can show where data change has happened, it's a lot easier to get the buy-in from the business to start going and owning their own data and looking at some of the root causes of data quality management. So that's I think probably the main things. I guess, I mean, other things in terms of like I would say in terms of kind of the amount of effort required around that this getting populating Reltio data, not that great effort. We've spent a lot of time cleansing our data up front and ensuring that it conforms, and we've had to do work on changing our mappings and redefining some of our existing hierarchies, for example, address hierarchies. But that's, again, the data standards piece that has to be done up front on any MDM implementation. And then we're loading it into Reltio and then running a one-off matching process. So I don't, in terms of that piece, that's pretty straightforward, I would say.
Excellent. Well, David, you've done a really good job talking about your requirements and also some of the value you're getting from Reltio already. So I'm going to skip through the selection criteria for the solution and go right to the business value, right? So as you're making a case to make this investment in this technology, can you walk us through what the business value drivers were?
So there's a number, and they kind of relate to some of the earlier themes. So, I mean, ultimately making the organization more customer-centric. So, improving our kind of being able to be more direct and personalized in terms of how we see a customer is probably one of the most important things that we're able to do. And the idea that we're starting with the party, but that can then be expanded and utilized across the organization. If we have these things, this is kind of the nuts and bolts of getting this in place. But this is in place, it allows you to be able to do other things. So because we've got this common 360 view, we're able to look at new things, and you said products and services that we currently, or we used to, historically couldn't do. In terms of kind of DQ, we say it's going to be about 20% at least, just as we initially begin. It will improve over time because the piece around being able to federate stewardship to the business means we hold up the mirror. We're able to get people within the business to start stewarding their own data, and that's really, really important. And getting the buy-in from the organisation to do that, that's where we start to make a big change, because that's where a lot of the issues lie around poor quality data entering the organisation. And as I said, being able to produce stats, again, DQ stats are absolutely critical. Pushing this, again, producing this type of information for people across the organisation at various levels to surface an activity that is, the MDM type of activity that has been happening for many, many years, but it's been happening almost below the radar. No one really knows what goes on, but surfacing what's happening, the amount of data we're ingesting, quality of it, who owns the data, changing over time, how much the quality's gone up or down. Surfacing all of this information is absolutely important if the data is going to be taken seriously. Accelerating data ingestion, being able to do things quicker allows us to be able to be more agile and smart with how we make decisions.
So David, a good question came in that I think ties really nicely to this point. The person who asked the question wants to know which different organizations are going to use this customer data, and is it shared across all departments, or do you have a phased approach to rolling this out across departments?
So it's shared across all departments. It's used as so it will be used across the organisation this is the kind of the golden record for our party data. Initially party data, and I don't mean what I mean by party record, the customer record, effectively, with products attached, with lines of business, for example, with other information that we may want to capture, so the usual suspects, the reference data I mentioned, contact information, other type of information in that space that we will be capturing. We plan to expand into other domains as well. That will be the kind of the next piece. But yeah, it has to be shared, because if you're not going to be sharing it, it's kind of, what's the point? The point of MDM is we're sharing the data so it can be used, provisioned from a single point and then used by multiple people.
Good. And then another question came in, which is interesting. When you're sharing the data with brokers, do you actually envision that they're going to be able to submit data change requests and help with the data curation process?
With brokers, so I do see us. So I think yes is the answer to that. In short, I do see us again, the use of having nice UIs, having an accessible environment for people to be able to see the quality of data, to see how we've had change over time. Then yes, absolutely. So we have a mechanism within our team, but also we're looking at building out a wider mechanism around when there are issues, being able to for people at the front end, at the front line, for example, the sales guys, brokers, to be able to come back into the business, into people like us, and to say these are issues that we think we have. Can we go about fixing them? So I think part of the message around bringing in kind of sustainable kind of MDM is again surfacing those issues and allowing people within the organisation to have an avenue to be able to go and fix things. And it will change. It will take time, but it does start the process around us being able to move towards a place where we can be kind of proactive around this rather than being reactive.
Well, David, our time has gone super fast. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. We'll definitely love to have you back for another session. But with 5 seconds left, any parting words for everybody?
I would say be very clear on what your objectives are, and ensure that there is a very, very, you absolutely need to have sponsorship behind it, but be very clear on why why it is that you're bringing in an MDM solution, and how is it going to work in practice in the target operating state. So not to focus on current model and perhaps removing an existing system, but what is the future state and how is it going to work? So I mentioned, is it going to be federated and bringing in stewardship, increasing data security? How is it going to work in practice in the future? So I would focus, and that's my advice, focus on that, on those, and then build out how is that going to work in practice? What's the target operating model? Who needs to be involved? What are the processes and the people behind it?
Excellent, David. Well, thank you so much for sharing your advice, and continued good luck with your transformation.
Thank you.